Hey everyone, it's Rob, and I'm back today with another video for the Law series. This will be the second video in the Law playlist on my channel. I encourage you to go look at the first one as well if you're interested in the law. One of the reasons I wanted to do this video is because here's a gentleman that's going to jail for basically trading cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin. He used to be a miner and decided that there was more money in trading those currencies and providing a service to his customers, and so he started doing that. And a few years later, he got in trouble with the federal government, and now he's about to go to jail a few days after he gave this interview. You can see this video out on YouTube. It's called Crypto Trader Heads to Prison, the Randall Lord interview. And it's a very interesting case study for you guys, especially if you're trading cryptocurrencies. Now, I do have some issues with the legal aspects of this case, which I'll be talking about right after the video. I'm going to go ahead and play the whole video for you guys if you haven't seen it. Then I'll spend 2 to 3 minutes talking about the legal aspects after that. We'll keep this total video under 20 minutes. Please stay tuned for the legal discussion afterwards, because I think it's very important to understand what your rights may be under the law in regards to cryptocurrencies and how the federal government may have overstepped its bounds here, according to Randall Lord. And we'll explore some of those statutes regarding cryptocurrencies, what the government calls virtual currencies, and where their regulatory powers may begin and end in that space. Well, here we go with the video first.
I've only been with Bitcoin since about 2012, 2013, somewhere along in there. When I first got involved in Bitcoin, my son and I were just Bitcoin miners. And as we began mining some of the coins, and he would sell some of them, he finally realized that he could actually make just as much money or more by just buying and selling rather than mining. So we kind of got out of the mining business, and in about 2013 we got into where we were just doing sales. Essentially the way it worked is we would buy Bitcoins from either an individual or from one of the large Bitcoin exchanges that exist in the United States, and we'd sell to whoever wanted to buy them. And that went on for a few years until we got a knock on the door when the feds showed up and said, "Hey, what's going on?" They started asking a lot of questions. And shortly after that, an indictment came where we were accused of all kinds of things, and then we ended up in court.
Prior to the knock on the door, you had taken steps that you thought were successful in an effort to stay legitimate.
Yeah, I believe it was June of 2013. The exchange that we were buying our Bitcoins from notified us that because of the volume of Bitcoins that we were buying from them, that we would have to be registered with FinCEN. That's a division of the Treasury Department. I think FinCEN stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is what that stands for. Anyway, they told us we needed to register with FinCEN, or register our business with FinCEN, and that if our state required a license as a money service business, we would need to get that as well. So at that time, I looked up the state statutes regarding money service businesses, and I read through it a few times and realized that at the state level, what we were doing was completely legal, that no license was required, and the reason it wasn't required is because we were simply buying and selling Bitcoins, which is not currency under state law. For it to be a currency, it has to be issued or generated from a state or a government of some type. Like Federal Reserve notes are issued by the Treasury Department. Because Bitcoin is not issued in that way, it's not considered a currency. So therefore, we didn't need a license. Anyway, I looked at the registration issue and I said, well, okay, if that's what I have to do, I'll do that. It's a rather long process, but it's all done on computer. You just, give them lots of information about your business, what you're doing. Even though I tried to register with FinCEN back in in June of 2013, the Bitcoin exchange company that we were dealing with notified me that they couldn't find my registration number, and that was in November of 2013. And so I went and looked, and sure enough, I couldn't find anything about my registration either. So I registered again, went through the whole process. And this time, for whatever reason, it got saved. They sent me a registration number, and I thought everything's fine.
So that registration was the federal level, and
yes,
the state level
is the license. When the federal government calls you an unlicensed money service business, they mean both things. I didn't find that they meant both things until much later in the process. At the what was called the change of plea hearing, I pled guilty to being an unlicensed money service business. And at that time, I was under the impression, and so was my attorney, because he's the one that advised me of this, was that because I didn't have a license, I was an unlicensed money service business. Well, so I went ahead and pled guilty, and after that, it bothered me a lot because I knew I had no intent of being an unlicensed money service business. I thought I'd complied. So I went and read the regulations again, and I said, I can't be wrong. This isn't that obscure. This, even though financial laws can be very complex, this seemed to be very clear to me. So I contacted the Office of Financial Institutions in Baton Rouge. That's the agency that regulates money service businesses. And I asked them point blank, here's what I'm doing. Do I have to have a license? They said, no, you're correct. You don't have to have a license because Bitcoin is not a currency. It doesn't meet the statute. Therefore, it's not regulated under a license. I gave that information to my attorney. He immediately wrote up a plea to withdraw my guilty plea. We sent it to the court, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and finally we got an answer from them, and they said, no, we're not going to let you withdraw your plea. It would be inconvenient to the court to have to go to trial with this. So after that, we went through sentencing, and the judge was very apparent that he was trying to give us the harshest sentence possible. He would add up every single point that he could to make sure we got the maximum prison time, and here we are. I'm only like 4 days away from having to report to the federal penitentiary.
Okay, so I wanted to stop the video here for a minute and talk about what has been discussed so far. So this gentleman is saying that he resides in Louisiana, that he was conducting Bitcoin exchanges, buying and selling with other people, went to the state multiple times, and they said, you don't own a money service business because Bitcoin does not meet the legal definition of currency in the state of Louisiana. However, some federal people had told him that you need to register with FinCEN, and because you're a money services business, and you also need to go to the state and get a license. Well, that was really bad advice because, first of all, the state said you don't have to have a license, so that was incorrect. Second of all, he registered with FinCEN as a money service business, even though he didn't meet the definition for money service business, and Bitcoin doesn't meet the definition for currency, which I'll talk about a lot more later and why that's very important to the case. I think the mistake that was made here legally from his perspective is twofold. One, he registered with FinCEN when there did not appear to be a statute that required him to do so, or at least no one actually provided him the statute because he didn't know that one existed. He was just upon the advice of somebody acting in the capacity of somebody from FinCEN at the Treasury. One thing that I will warn you guys in a lot of my legal readings is just because a government tells you something verbally doesn't mean that you should rely on what they tell you. I could go into more detail about this, but there are actually government manuals in certain parts of the Treasury, specifically in the IRS, that say you cannot rely on the verbal word of one of these employees, and especially if you call a hotline or call the 800 number for providing you the right advice. You have to be responsible for understanding the law yourself. So he got advice from somebody in FinCEN. He kept trying to register with FinCEN as a money service business, even though by state law he didn't meet the criteria for it. And we'll look at the federal law also to see whether Bitcoin meets the criteria for currency here in a moment. His second mistake was pleading guilty. He pled guilty before the court of being an unlicensed money service business. That's basically admitting, under penalty of perjury essentially, that, yes, I am an unlicensed money business. So whether or not he actually was an unlicensed money business, he gave jurisdiction to the court to rule in his matter because he claimed to be an unlicensed money business and pled in a court as such, even though there was no statute that he found that actually required him to do so. This is an important legal concept. The Constitution basically grants you rights. However, you can give up your rights. And without going into details, the power to contract, whether it's the power to contract with another private individual or the power to contract with the government, whether it be federal or state or local, is absolute. Contracts are protected absolutely in the Constitution. When he entered into the court and agreed that he should be regulated by FinCEN and admitted to being an unlicensed money service business, I think he sort of lost his ability to legally say, wait a minute, I'm going to challenge you accusing me of committing a crime, and you have to prove, first of all, that you have jurisdiction over this matter, and second of all, that I've broken a statute, and you have to prove what that statute is. He basically didn't have those defenses, it sounds like, by his description. I think he ended up messing up pretty big time, and he's going to end up going to prison for it. I'm going to play the rest of the video, and then we're going to go look at some documents to see, is Bitcoin a currency, what is a money service business, and what regulations at the state and federal level actually apply.
What happens on Thursday?
I have a choice of one or two things. Either I can transport myself to the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia, which is 600 miles away, on my own, or I can turn myself into the marshal's office here in this building. If I do that, they will then place me in either the Caddo Correctional Institute or the Bossier Parish Jail. And I'll have to sit there for about a month until they arrange transportation to move me to the penitentiary in Atlanta.
Both are horrible options.
Yes, they are.
We both know that this is the prison capital of the world.
Yes.
Prison state of the nation.
Right.
And so all the time we're hearing about the revolving door. Criminals are only serving a portion of their time that they were issued.
Right.
Is that the case in your...
Well, no. I may not have to serve all 46 months, but in the federal system, they make you serve a minimum of 85% of the original sentence. So instead of serving almost 4 years, it may be 3 1/4 years that I have to serve, which is just insane for something that involved no victims. All my customers were happy. Nobody got hurt. The only thing that happened was my registration didn't get saved on the FinCEN website when I tried to register it. And so for that, I have to go to prison for nearly 4 years. That's absolutely insane.
So let's zoom out a little bit.
All right.
You know, the old saying, the more numerous the laws, the more corrupt the state.
Yeah.
This, unfortunately, is a very direct impact example. Just talk about how far off the rails the federal government is.
It's incredibly far off the rails. And anytime you allow a federal government or a government to redefine the terms and the meanings of the words in their contract, then you've allowed that government to have unlimited power, because they can make it say anything they want it to. And that's what's happened here. The laws regarding financial institutions was originally written by Congress, but in this case, a federal agency of the executive department, not the legislative department, has decided what the law means, and they have expanded on the meaning of what a money service business is to include people like me. And they're just expanding their powers more and more until your liberties mean absolutely nothing.
That expansion of power has been a slow crawl, bit by bit, and they, take over this small part, this other small part. Your case in particular is almost one of those small step forwards of the power grab. Talk to me about what the leap that they're making.
Well, the leap that they're making is that they're redefining what a money service business is, and also what currency is. According to their own regulations, Bitcoin is not a currency. The IRS considers it to be a property. The Commodities and Exchange Board considers it to be a commodity, but no government agency considers it to be a currency, because even though it acts like a currency somewhat, it doesn't have all the criteria of being a currency. Maybe the mistake I made was I didn't get an attorney involved when I first started the business. I thought I could read the law and understand it, and it was very clear to me what I could and couldn't do. Apparently that wasn't good enough. Because they have expanded their meaning of what those statutes are to include anything they want it to be, I don't think that even an attorney can really protect you. They're going to just do what they want to do. So all I can say is be careful. It's apparent to me that the judge is afraid of things like Bitcoin, of virtual currencies, of not being able to track people and their activities, is one of the reasons I got such a harsh sentence. The federal government wants to go after people who are involved in anything that thwarts their efforts to spy on you without a warrant. And that's really what this case is about more than anything. They're afraid of a jury hearing about how they've treated me regarding the licensing issue. Because I think most people would say, if there is no license, how can you charge someone with being an unlicensed money service business? And also, the very definition of what a money service business is one of those things that's so vague and broad, it can mean anything the government wants it to mean. So, you know, I don't think most people would be for giving the government that much power to use it in any way they want to, and to use it against people whenever the government doesn't like what you're doing. And I think that's one of the most important points that I've learned about this case.
Okay, that's pretty much the end of the video, and he brought up some really important points there in the second half of the video. The number one point that I wanted to make or talk about that he made was, this is an executive branch that went after him. The Treasury is part of the executive branch, and they don't have the right under the Constitution to prosecute for these types of things. I mean, they don't, and that's why this guy should have challenged jurisdiction, because they don't really have the right to regulate commerce as part of the executive branch. They're not part of the Congress. They're not part of the court system, or have the right to prosecute under the courts established by the Constitution. So in my understanding, so I would have challenged a jurisdiction there, and I'm actually going to go to an article that talks about that. An Article I tribunal is a federal court organized under Article I of the United States Constitution. Article I courts differ from Article III courts, which are organized under Article III of the Constitution. Article I courts are created by the legislature and have differing level of independence from the executive and legislative branches. They can be Article I courts, also called legislative courts, set up by Congress to review agency decisions, ancillary courts with judges appointed by Article III, appeals court judges, or administrative agencies. The existence of Article I tribunals is controversial. Their jurisdiction has been challenged before the Supreme Court, which ruled that Article I tribunals may exist, but that their power must be circumscribed, and when potential deprivation of life, liberty, property, or property interest is involved, their decisions are subject to ultimate review in an Article III court. Okay, what is an Article III court? There are federal courts established by and under Article III of the U.S. Constitution, which states, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Notice how the executive branch is not mentioned there at all. And the Treasury is part of the executive branch. These courts include the Article III courts, Supreme Court, one court with national jurisdiction, Court of Appeals, 12 geographic-based and one for the federal court, district courts, 94 in 50 states, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico along with their subordinate bankruptcy courts, and the Court of International Trade. The federal courts have power to decide only those cases over which the Constitution gives them authority. These courts are located principally in the larger cities. Only carefully selected types of cases may be heard in the federal courts. The controversies that may be decided in the federal courts are identified in Article III, Section 2 of the Constitution. And that basically means they may decide cases for which state courts are inappropriate or might be suspected of partiality. Thus, federal courts may decide, in the language of the Constitution, controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states. For example, one might be sued by another state for the pollution of its air. Since the impartiality of the courts in either state could be questioned, such a suit might be decided in a federal court. Similarly, the Constitution extends the authority of federal courts in cases affecting ambassadors, consuls, and other public ministers. The U.S. government also has constitutional responsibility for U.S. relations with other nations, so on and so forth. And it goes on here to say the Constitution provides federal courts power to hear cases involving the Constitution as a law, laws enacted by Congress, treaties, and laws related to navigable waters and commerce on them. Okay? It doesn't say somebody trading Bitcoin within the state of Louisiana, that in which trading Bitcoin is not it does not require a license for money service business because Bitcoin is not a currency. And down here it says, between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, or between citizens of the same state. The federal government is not a state in that it's not one of the several states of the Union. So where does the federal government get off suing someone where there is no controversy between a citizen of one state and another, or a state and another state, and where the state in which he resides claims that he's not doing anything illegal? Exactly where does that jurisdiction come from? It's a very interesting question. Let's dive into that. Here's a Wikipedia entry on virtual currencies and FinCEN. In 2013, the Federal Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, released a paper stating exchanges and administrators of virtual currency are subject to the Bank of Secrecy Act and must register as a money services business. The purpose of this legislation was to prevent financial exchanges from being used to launder money or financial crime, including terrorism. The European Central Bank also recommended. Well, the European Central Bank has nothing to do with the United States. In spite of the BSA applying to VC exchanges and administrators, these two terms are very important. We'll get on to in just a moment. Virtual currency is still used to finance crime and to launder money because not every transaction of VC networks are required to comply with the BSA, and not every online exchange complies with the BSA. Okay, so here is a paper that FinCEN released off of their website, fincen.gov, the application of money service business regulations to the rental of computer systems of mining. Now, keep in mind that this is talking about mining currency, but they also address in here trading of virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies, which I've highlighted in blue. It says, for purposes of guidance, FinCEN refers to the participants in generic virtual currency arrangements using the term user, exchanger, and administrator. A user is a person that obtains virtual currency to purchase goods or services on the user's own behalf. FinCEN has determined that users are not monetary transmitters. An exchanger is a person engaged in a business in the exchange of virtual currency for real currency, funds, or other virtual currency. Now that sentence is extremely important. We'll get to that in just a moment. An administrator is a person engaged in a business issuing a virtual currency and who has authority to redeem such virtual currencies. Both exchangers and administrators may operate as money transmitters depending on the specific facts and circumstances. Okay, so on and so forth. He would not qualify as a user. He would not qualify as administrator because he's not one of the virtual currency owners or somebody that can take Bitcoin in and out of the network. That relies on the mining and who allows the award of the cryptos upon mining activity. So it wouldn't be the miner. It would actually be the administrators of the Bitcoin network. The only way that he could be brought into FinCEN as an exchanger, because buying and selling of currencies, even virtual currency to another virtual currency, even if not transacting in cash at some point. So I went and looked up at Cornell Law School the federal regulations regarding, well, I'll just read it to you, right? Regarding financial institutions and money regulations. It says, when used in this chapter and forms prescribed under this chapter were not otherwise distinctly expressed, the terms shall have the meanings blah, blah. So it's going to define terms. And it's basically Chapter X, which is FinCEN, okay? So I just went to Part 1010, Subpart A. The reason I went there is because that's actually quoted down here as the sources for this, for FinCEN's ability to monitor and regulate virtual currencies. Now, if you look up the term virtual currency on this page, you don't see virtual. You see currency, but not virtual. Let's see what currency is. Well, here's the Bank Secrecy Act, the Currency and Foreign Transactions Reporting Act, its amendment and statutes, okay? And when we look at currency. Currency is defined as the coin and paper money of the United States or of any other country that is designated as legal tender. Bitcoin is not, and that circulates and is customarily used and accepted as a medium of exchange in the country of issuance. Currency includes U.S. silver certificates, U.S. notes, and Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes being the dollar. Currency also includes official foreign banknotes that are customarily used and accepted as a medium of exchange. Now, section FF is also referenced down here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's down here in this reference, FF. So we're going to go to 31 CFR 1010 FF, and I'm just going to scroll down. It comes up here pretty quick. And we're going to see what section FF has in regards to money service businesses. A person, wherever located doing business, whether or not on a regular basis or as an organized or licensed business concern, wholly or in substantial part within the United States, and in one or more of the capacities listed in paragraph FF of this section. This includes, but is not limited to, maintenance of any agent, agency, branch, or office in the United States. Dealer in foreign exchange. A person that accepts the currency, let me highlight this for you guys, or other monetary instruments, funds, or other instruments denominated in the currency of one or more countries in exchange for the currency or other monetary instruments or other instruments denominated in the currency, one or more countries in an amount greater than $1,000. So what is a monetary instrument? It's a currency, it's a traveler's check, it's a negotiable instrument such as a check, business check, so on and so forth, and securities stock bearer form. So this does not, there's nothing here at all, okay? There's nothing here at all about virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, the blockchain. And here's all of the different pieces. Now, they do talk about money transmitter. A person that provides money transmission services. The term money transmitter services means acceptance of currency, funds, or other value that substitutes for currency from one person, and the transmission of currency, funds, or value that substitutes for currency to another person. What is a person? An individual, corporation, or partnership, trust, or state, joint stock company, as legal, and all entities cognizable as legal personalities. So, in other words, this guy is not a person in terms of the rule. He's a natural human being. The person is a financial agency. And this is where the government regulates a lot of transactions, is they turn you into, or you have to be represent or be licensed as a financial agency. This guy did not have to get a license according to the state of Louisiana, and there's nothing in the federal code that I can see that says you have to have a license for virtual currencies. So he's not a person as defined in this code. And the one thing that is really important to understand legally is the legal definition is different than the common English definition. When I say person in common English, I'm talking about a human, male or female. When we're talking about person in these codes, you have to look at how it's defined in the code. And it says, and all entities recognizable as legal personalities. An individual, if you look in the code, is also defined in terms of not a human being, but someone who is licensed or is acting in a public office for the federal government. And I'll leave you to look that up in the terms and definitions, but that's my understanding. You should check that for yourself. Any means includes, but is not limited to, the financial agency or institution, a Federal Reserve Bank or other facility, electronic funds transfer, or informal value transfer system. So the only thing in the federal codes that I can see that might be possibly construed to regulate this man and trading Bitcoin, or anybody in trading Bitcoin, is other value substitutes for currency, which is not defined here. Now, there is a precept in law that means if something's not defined specifically, it's void for vagueness. And I don't have that ready for this video, but I'll include it in future videos. A law cannot stand where it's void for vagueness, meaning if they don't specifically define what other value that substitute for currency means, it doesn't apply. It's invalid. It cannot be upheld because no one can be expected to follow that. And one of the precepts of law is that citizens should be able to read the law and understand it. You shouldn't have to have a lawyer. You shouldn't have to go stand before a judge. You should be able to read the law, and it should be so clear that you understand what it means. Well, this sentence, other value substitutes for currency, is void for vagueness because nobody knows what that means. No one also knows what it means informal value transfer system. Okay. First of all, they don't define Bitcoin, blockchain, or any virtual currency as money. They're identifying only people who act at, let's go to the definition of a person. that act as a legal personality, a joint venture, a syndicate. Okay, these are special designations given out by the federal government. A corporation, a partnership, and an individual. And an individual in this case does not mean just a natural human person, natural-born human person. So there's nothing here that concrete says you traded Bitcoin in a legal capacity in which you had to have a license at the federal level, and therefore, we can prosecute you. Okay? So, in my opinion. Now, again, I can't represent this as fact. I can only tell you what I'm reading. But I know that the law is void for vagueness. So if I can't read this and interpret it and understand it and have the freedom of association with you guys to talk about it and interpret it, then it's void for vagueness. It cannot be upheld in a court of law. And that's one defense that this guy could have used is, hey, it's void for vagueness. Nowhere does it state that I have to have a license for this or that cryptocurrency is any sort. It's actually regulated by FinCEN laws. So I went to a website which gives money service business regulators for each state and clicked on the state of Louisiana, and it took me to the what is this called? Office of Financial Institutions, and you can see along the left-hand side that there's nothing about cryptocurrency. And it's definitely not depository. He's not a bank or a credit union or a thrift. Non-depository, we're talking about bonds, check cashers, consumer loan brokers, licensed lenders. And I've done a search on the site, and I cannot find virtual currency or cryptocurrency anywhere. In fact, from the state of Louisiana, from the Office of Financial Institutions, here's a nice definition of why virtual currency is not a currency. The Louisiana Office of Financial Institutions, LOFI, is issuing this advisory due to the increased interest in virtual currency, so on and so forth. What is a virtual currency? Virtual currency is an electronic medium of exchange that does not have all of the attributes of a real or fiat currency. Virtual currencies include cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Litecoin, which are not legal tender and are not issued or backed by any central bank or government authority. So the state of Louisiana is saying this is not a currency by state standards and by their understanding, even by federal standards, in terms of it's not issued by a government authority and therefore does not fall under legal tender laws. Okay? It's not regulatable. Okay? It's not backed by the United States or the national government. Well, that would seem to limit the United States federal government and FinCEN's authority to prosecute for trading it. It's not insured by the FDIC, not backed by a physical commodity, and it's not legal tender for debts. Virtual currencies have limited legitimate purposes and can be purchased, sold, and exchanged with other types of virtual currencies or real currencies like the US dollar. This can happen through various mechanisms, so on and so forth. So here it basically defines, as far as the state of Louisiana goes, trading Bitcoin does not violate any state or federal statutes that they're aware of, and it's not regulatable by the national government. Okay, I've already shown you the difference between Article 1 and Article 3 court, where the gentleman could have challenged the government's jurisdiction, FinCEN, for prosecuting. And I just wanted to make one final point here. Another Wikipedia entry on the FinCEN. It was established by the order of the Secretary of the Treasury on April 25, 1990. In May 1994, its mission was broadened to include regulatory responsibilities, so on and so forth. September 26, after Title III of the Patriot Act, made it official bureau of Department of Treasury. That's an executive branch office. Okay, I don't see the jurisdiction for the executive branch to prosecute in a federal court. But according to this, Article 3 courts are the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, the District Court, the Court of International Trade, and it's established by the courts of the Congress. And it's to regulate controversies between two or more states. That doesn't apply here. Between a state and citizens of another state. That doesn't apply here. Between citizens of different states. That doesn't apply here. Between citizens of the same state. That doesn't apply here. And it's talking about federal court's jurisdiction, commerce among the states. Well, okay, then the state agency would have had to sue him, and it wasn't. It's talking about on the seas, where he's not on the navigable waters. Okay, I see no jurisdiction here, and I think jurisdiction is the key issue. Should FinCEN have been able to prosecute him in an Article 3 constitutional court regarding what he did, when they don't have a clearly defined regulation that says Bitcoin is currency and Bitcoin can be covered by FinCEN? The only thing that they have in there that could possibly be interpreted was that void statement which says other value that substitutes for currency. But it's void for vagueness because it has to state exactly what that means, or else it can't be applied. That's the law, as I understand it. So my general disclaimer here is when I look at the law and I look at this case, I don't see what the guy did wrong. I'm not a legal expert, but the First Amendment protects my right to free speech. There is a precept in law that every citizen has the responsibility to understand the law and the right to talk about and to interpret the law as they see it. And then if you want to try it, you go to the courts. Okay? So I'm not doing anything wrong by discussing this. I'm not advocating a certain legal position. And I'm just meeting with you guys to discuss the merits of the law, and that's the freedom of assembly as we're doing this on the internet. Okay, so I haven't broken any laws by talking about this, and I don't think the gentleman broke a law by trading cryptos. I don't see where the law is. If you guys know the law, let me know. Put it down there. If there's a statute I'm missing, if there's some act that was passed that gave them the right. But I think this guy's correct. I think it was legislation from the bench. The judge turned it into a law from the bench, and he was in the wrong court for that to even happen. He wasn't in an Article III court. Or at least if they were in an Article III court, they were trying something outside the jurisdiction of that court according to the Constitution. That's my take on it. The law is extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, as far as the economy goes, finance goes, and your own personal well-being goes. And if cryptos are going to be a store of value and a medium of exchange in our system, you have to consider how that may affect the monopoly of money from the federal government and why the federal government may be attacking people like this just for exchanging Bitcoin and offering services to consumers. And that's basically it. And that's why the law matters. You have to be really careful. Even if the law doesn't apply to you, you have to know how to defend yourself. And be careful when you hire a lawyer and he pleads guilty for you. And then the judge says, well, it'd be inconvenient for us to go to a jury trial. Yeah, because the jury would look at this and say, first, you don't have jurisdiction. And second, show me the law. Where is the law that says this guy should register his money service business and he did something wrong? I cannot find it. He could not find it. His lawyer could not find it. So if it's not published somewhere in the statutes, it's not law. It has to be published. People have to know where the law is. They have to be able to read and interpret the law. And that's the way.
This has been a Gold Silver Pros production. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and sign up for our newsletter on goldsilverpros.com.